She had always told me when I was a teenager, if you ever get pregnant, I'm sending you away to boarding school. I asked my mom to come in. I said, I'm pregnant. She turned around, walked out, and slammed the door on her way out.
Nothing said, just left.
Her reaction was, this is going to ruin your life. You're not going to be able to sleep for 6 years. You're not going to finish college. You've wasted all this time and effort. Your life is basically over. This is the end.
To the naked eye, these women experiencing unplanned pregnancies feel isolated. They feel, I'm the only one. There's a lot of shame that comes in, but statistically we know 1 out of every 4 women experience an unplanned pregnancy. It is an epidemic in the United States.
It's how I felt. I felt like a child, and my mother was telling me what to do, and I had to do it. Here I am in the back seat, feeling like I'm being driven to my death. It feels like I'm on my way to the gas chamber. I started thinking, oh crap, I'm going to have to do this thing I swore I would never do. Which was have an abortion. I'm going to have to do that.
On today's episode, I'll be interviewing a woman who went from being a mechanical engineering student facing an unplanned pregnancy at Auburn University to a tenured professor on that very same campus. In the 80s, Chris balanced a demanding academic schedule, a co-op job, and the shock of an unexpected pregnancy. What followed was a moment of fear, doubt, and ultimately a split second of courage that changed everything. From walking into an abortion clinic to walking across the stage at graduation 6 months pregnant, she realized her future had not ended like she was told. Rather, it had just begun. Join us as we explore her journey of courage, perseverance, and that full circle moment that brought her back to where it all began. If you're listening for the first time, Unplanned and Untold is completely donor funded. You can leave a tax-deductible donation through the link in our show notes if you believe that no student mom should face an unplanned pregnancy alone. You can also leave a 5-star review for free if you love the show. Please welcome Chris to Unplanned and Untold. So Chris, can you tell us a little bit what it was like in college at Auburn University studying mechanical engineering in the 80s?
What was it like? I was the only girl.
You're the only girl.
Only girl. It was a lot of work, a lot of studying, a lot of study sessions. The classes were abstract and not really related to my life or my experiences. So I joined a co-op program my sophomore year, which gave me real life practical applications for what I was learning. And that helped a lot. So yeah.
Wow. So I know we've had a couple mechanical engineer students come through Baby Steps program at Auburn, and they say the load is extremely hard, very intense schedules. Was it the same back in the 80s as well?
I just remember being completely stretched to the max intellectually and physically with my time. My entire life was just wrapped around getting through the material. I didn't work when I was at school because I was a co-op student. I was able to just work every other quarter. And I went to IBM up in North Carolina 6 times for 6 different quarters. Wow. And that amount of money put me through college. So I was able to completely support myself financially by working every other quarter. Wow. And then I could really focus on figuring out engineering the quarters I was back in Auburn.
Wow. So being in such a male-dominated work study, being in such a male-dominated major, finding out you're in an unplanned pregnancy has to hit a bit differently.
You're right.
Were you absolutely terrified? Take our listeners back to how old were you when you found out you were pregnant, and what were all the emotions that bubbled up from that information?
I had just turned 22. It took me a little over 5 years to get through college because of the co-op experience. 6 quarters get added to your time. So just turned 22. I was absolutely shocked.
How did you know that you could be pregnant?
I went and got a blood test at the university's health clinic, because I hadn't had a period in 3 months, which isn't all that unusual.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'd never gone and had a blood test before at the university, so I don't know why this time I decided to. But my first thought was, this can't be true. I must have some kind of tumor.
So when you went to the clinic and they did the blood draw, what was the news that they came back with?
That it was positive.
And immediately you thought, there's no way.
There's no way.
Something else.
I mean, I must have a tumor. And they're like, no, I don't think so.
What was going through your mind? Was thinking that it could be something else, like a tumor, a way of almost coping with it and hoping that it wouldn't be true?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, hoping it wouldn't be true, hoping I wouldn't have to tell my mother, hoping maybe it would just go away. No, it's hard to remember everything.
Do you remember telling your boyfriend, like, who was the first person that you told you were pregnant?
It would have been him.
Okay.
And I had a best friend at the time, and I know I told her. So it was just the two of them.
And what was his reaction at first?
We were both like, I guess we're going to get married.
Okay.
That was our initial thought. There was no proposal. There was nothing said like that, but I think we were both kind of going down that path in the beginning. Mm-hmm. We had been together for 1.5 years and were really committed to each other, and both of us felt like this was going to be a life, but we were going to go to grad school. We were going to go to Europe.
Okay.
We were 22. We were going to do things first.
So he didn't take it too terribly hard.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did, because it whatever was going to happen, it was going to put a roadblock in our plans.
Sure.
Sure. And I think he, I don't remember exactly when he got a plane ticket, but I met him while I was a co-op student. So he was not an Auburn student. He lived in Chicago. And I think he got a plane ticket to come down and be with me. But I don't remember exactly when he bought that ticket, whether it was when I said to him, I'm having an abortion, or was it right away? I don't quite remember.
Okay, so let's back up. When does the thought of abortion come to the table? Okay,
so I eventually told my mother. I remember I was sitting on my bed. I was living at home. The quarters that I wasn't at IBM, I lived at home.
All right.
Sitting on my bed, I asked my mom to come in. She came in the room. I said, I'm pregnant. She turned around, walked out, and slammed the door on her way out.
Nothing said, just left. Wow.
Yeah. She had always told me when I was a teenager, if you ever get pregnant, I'm sending you away to boarding school. I didn't know what was going to happen to this baby, but I knew I was going to boarding school. So,
oh my goodness, you were mentally prepared for that.
I knew it was bad news.
Sure.
And then when I went to talk with her, I must have come out of my room and gone to talk to her. Mm-hmm. Her reaction was, this is going to ruin your life. You're not going to be able to sleep for 6 years. You're not going to finish college. You've wasted all this time and effort, and money pursuing something you'll never be able to finish. Your life is basically over. Wow. This is the end.
Wow. How did hearing such strong words impact you in that moment?
Coming from my mother, it weighed a lot more than if just a random person had said that. If a random person had said that, I'd go, oh, you're wrong. Mm. I'm going to be fine. Mm-hmm. But having my mother say that in such a premonition kind of a way, right. Like she raised 3 children. She ought to know how hard this is. She drilled it into me enough that I started thinking, oh crap, I'm going to have to do this thing I've swore I would never do.
Which was
have an abortion. I'm going to have to do that. It was never something I ever thought I'd ever do, but I guess I have no choice. It really felt like the way that things were presented to me, that I had no choice. I don't remember what else she said to me other than those strong words. She may have said other things about cost or insurance or how are you going to support yourself? I don't remember all those things, but it came across very strongly that I was not going to have a life.
Wow.
If I did this. And I remember her telling me to open up the phone book and find the phone number for the abortion clinic in Montgomery.
Okay.
And I remember her saying, I'll give you a Tootsie Roll if you call.
Interesting.
So treated like a child.
Sure.
That's how I felt. I felt like a child, and my mother was telling me what to do, and I had to do it. Here I was getting through college because I could live at home, putting myself through everything except that, living at home.
So do you end up making that appointment? How does this unfold?
I made the appointment, and the boyfriend showed up. I don't remember if he got his plane ticket before the appointment was made, but he was there. So he shows up. He is not happy. He had convinced himself we were getting married, and he had started thinking about how was he going to tell his parents. And he was in school up in Chicago. How are we going to make this work? And then when I told him that my mother had convinced me otherwise, he also felt like he had no choice. Like he didn't have any power. He felt like he had no power to try to convince me otherwise.
That's a hard place to be.
Yeah. So both of us felt like we were really trapped and had no agency, confidence, no support staff, helping solve problems. So my best friend, who didn't even live in Auburn, she lived in Atlanta, would get on the phone with me and try to convince me not to go ahead with this, but I didn't even listen to her.
With your best friend, what was her reasoning? What were the things that she was telling you why she didn't think you should have an abortion?
She had had one.
Okay.
And she regretted it terribly.
Wow. So she was speaking from experience.
Yeah. So if I was 22, she was probably 24.
Okay.
25. By the time she was 25, she had a complete hysterectomy due to medical reasons. So she never was able to have children of her own.
Wow.
So her whole life, she really regretted having made that decision.
So you've got your mom pushing you to do it, your boyfriend somewhat feeling like, I don't want this, but if your mom says this is the best thing to do, and then you've got your best friend who's experienced this and is saying, if I could go back, I wouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. What decision do you end up making? Do you end up keeping that appointment at the abortion clinic?
So I kept that appointment, and we drove to Montgomery, and I sat in the back seat, and my mother drove, and the boyfriend is up front.
Wow.
Talking with my mom about just random stuff. And here I am in the back seat, feeling like I'm being driven to my death. It feels like I'm on my way to the gas chamber. And I am in the worst deep pit. I'm feeling like I've been kidnapped and I'm being taken hostage.
Wow.
Awful. And to hear the two of them up front just chatting about the weather made it even worse for me.
Absolutely.
Because they weren't tuned into, well, I'm sure my boyfriend at the time was just in a state of shock, but my mother was not tuned in at all to anything I was experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
We got to Montgomery an hour later, and we're walking in, and there's a group of, I think, 2 people, maybe a man and a woman, who were standing outside and asked if they could pray with me.
Wow.
My mother got mad and said, "Don't stop. Come on. Let's go. Don't stop." And I insisted on stopping. My mother was very aggravated. Stopped, and it was just the kindest 2 people, prayed with me, asked me how I was doing, like I was feeling nice. It felt really nice to have someone kind, be empathetic. And I said, I feel like I have no choice. I really don't want to do this, but I feel completely trapped. And they said they would continue to pray for me. So there was no pressure. So as I'm walking into the clinic, I'm thinking, well, at least they're praying for me. And I get called back right away. And I talk with a counselor. And I told the counselor I didn't want to do this, that I felt kind of trapped and forced. And she said, well, it's completely legal. There's nothing wrong with it. And she told me that she was a particular religious denomination, and she still felt like it was perfectly ethical, moral, and legal. So, still, it felt like that was just pushing me even more forward. Mm-hmm. And then they said they needed to just check my urine before I went in. So I peed in a cup. And I'm sitting there just thinking, how the heck am I going to get out of this? And when the woman walked back from that urine test, she said, "I'm sorry, we can't do the abortion today. Your urine pregnancy test was negative."
What?
And I said, "Oh, but I've had a blood test."
Right.
And she said, "Okay, do you have documentation of that, like a lab receipt?" I said, "No, it's at my house in Auburn." And she said, "Well, I'm sorry, you'll have to go get that and make an appointment and reschedule."
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, every amount of strength, courage, fortitude just washed into me like a funnel. And I walked out of that back room into the waiting room where my mother and my boyfriend were. And I said, "Not having an abortion. Let's go home." "Why? What?" And I told him the story. And my mother was so furious.
Wow.
And my boyfriend was so upset that we were going to have to do this again.
Wow.
Like he was going to have to go through this trauma again. And on the way home in the backseat of that car, I'm realizing I'm not going back to Montgomery.
Wow.
And I have got the strength, courage, faith, ability to stand up to my mom. I felt like that was a complete miracle and gift. And I was taking it. I was taking it. That was my sign.
Wow.
So we got home, and Dan and I got in my little car and drove to Atlanta to see my best friend.
Okay.
I didn't want to stay at my mom's house that night. I didn't want to be around her. We drove to Atlanta. My friend did not know what had happened. I didn't tell her any of it. This was back when phone calls were expensive.
Right.
So it was $3 for the first minute.
Oh my gosh.
And that was minimum wage. So it was a lot of money just to make a minute phone call. So I think I called her enough to say, we're coming up there. She in her mind is thinking that I've had the abortion and I'm upset and I'm going to recover.
Sure.
So we showed up at her house that night, told her the story. She's crying. Her husband's crying. We're sitting on the couch in her little living room when Dan gets down on one knee and proposes to me.
Stop it. What a crazy shift of events and how life so quickly turned.
Mm-hmm. October 8th, 1985. It completely turned.
Wow.
So we were married by November 30th.
Okay.
Our daughter was born on July 5th.
Oh my goodness.
She is now 38, almost 39 years old.
Wow.
Let me tell you about the life I didn't have. Can I tell you about the life I didn't have?
Tell me.
We were poor at first.
Sure.
We didn't have much money. We had to live with his family, who were warm and loving and enveloping. And finally, baby was born. I was able to get on his parents' health insurance. Like, there was some law back then because I was married and I was 22. I was able to get on their health insurance.
Okay.
So in the beginning, I had to go to like a free health clinic, but by the time we were married, I had really good health insurance that we paid for. Dan was looking for a job, and by the time our daughter was born, he had a job lined up in Washington, D.C., and so we had a 3-week-old newborn.
Wow.
And we went to Washington, D.C., and he started his first job. I graduated from college.
Yes, let's take our listeners back even to that. So you were pregnant on Auburn's campus in the 80s. Were you showing? Were you able to hide this? Did anyone on campus know? I am just so intrigued because when I think back to when I was pregnant on Auburn's campus, back in 2012, it was very taboo then. I mean, that's only 13 years ago. So I cannot imagine what it felt like in the 80s to be pregnant on Auburn's campus.
I didn't tell anyone except one professor who was like a father figure to me. I didn't tell any of the people I was in school with.
Was it hard being pregnant, finishing, I think you had about 6 months till she was born that you had to finish out?
It was more than that.
More than that.
She was born in July. We got married at the end of November.
Okay.
So it was a while. I had some engineering classes to take that involved engines, and I was worried about the fumes and the smells, and I would put like a red bandana around my face, and the guys were like, "What are you doing?" And I would say, "Oh, it just smells bad."
Oh, no.
I remember getting up on the roof of some building to do something with a hygrometer. I don't know.
Oh my God.
And I remember being so afraid I was going to fall because of the fact that I was pregnant.
Right.
One student said something to me once. He says, "Looks like you gained some weight there." And I said, "Yeah, I have."
Oh, you shut that conversation down real quick. Wow.
And I graduated in, I think it was April, because we were on the quarter system. And I was, I think 5 months pregnant when I graduated. And I was definitely showing at that point. Mm-hmm. But I was married by then. And I just didn't care anymore. It just didn't talk about it.
Right.
We left as soon as I graduated and went to live with his parents up in up near Chicago.
Wow. And then rewinding back to before you were on his parents' insurance, in the meantime, were you going to the free clinics, and what was that experience like?
There was a free clinic on Opelika Road near the hospital.
I know which one you're talking about because that's the one that I went to as well. Isn't that crazy? It was dingy.
Oh yeah, it was horrible. And I remember feeling really out of place.
Yes.
And shamed. Mm-hmm. But I knew I needed prenatal care.
Right.
So what choice? I didn't have insurance.
Right.
What choice did I have? And actually, I think even after we got married, I continued to use it because I wasn't going to start with an OB and Auburn and then switched to one in up north. So I just kept going until I graduated.
Yes. And that clinic, I mean, grateful for, the care at no cost, because I couldn't have afforded it either, but mind blowing that clinic was still, in existence. It's not anymore, which is wild. They've incorporated, all of the Medicaid and patients into the normal OBGYN and all the other OBGYN offices. They now take it, but it was really embarrassing to be split off from the norm and to be told you were going to this specific place that everybody who couldn't afford health insurance went to.
Indigent mother.
What's that?
You're a poor indigent mother.
Yes. And I will say I was also treated as such there as well. They weren't the friendliest group of people.
I don't remember anything really about it other than just feeling totally out of place.
Absolutely. So what did it feel like walking across that graduation stage?
Don't remember.
You don't remember? Totally.
No memory.
Listen, and this is very common too. A lot of women, and especially the younger years of their unplanned pregnancy, that baby, no memories, because you're in such a fight or flight mode that it almost gets put in a box. And sometimes when I have these interviews, women are unpacking that box for like the first time in forever. They kind of just put the experience away, have never revisited it. And then when we're talking through it on the podcast, it all comes flooding back in. And that just goes to show how extremely hard unplanned pregnancies are and how traumatic they can be, even with when our memories, are taking into account. We can't remember all of those details because you are in such a fight or flight, zone.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Wow.
I look at, there's some pictures that were taken that day.
Right.
And I can look at the pictures, but I don't remember being in the picture. I really have no memory of it.
Wow. Did you ever feel that people questioned you and Dan getting married so quickly, or did they ever wonder if it was because you were pregnant?
Although I didn't tell anybody that's why we were getting married so quickly, I think my mother must have told people because at our wedding, I had a number of women come up and whisper in my ear, I was pregnant too when I got married.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Wow. How did that make you feel?
Oh, so much better. Like, oh, they're not judging me. Because I didn't tell anybody at the wedding I was pregnant. I didn't even tell my grandparents. I told my grandparents I was getting married in a month.
Oh my gosh.
And my mother must have told them. Because they didn't hound me as badly as you would think they would if I was very close to my grandparents.
Right.
So I didn't tell them I was pregnant until I'd been married for a couple of months. And then I said, oh, I'm pregnant. When are you due? Oh, sometime this summer, I think.
Right.
Whatever.
Wow. And that seems to be the case with unplanned pregnancies being such a taboo topic. Once we get past that point of, got married, had the baby, no one's going to ask any more questions. I don't have to talk about this anymore. But I feel like that piece of it is also what hurts future generations as well, because to the naked eye, these women experiencing unplanned pregnancies feel isolated. They feel I'm the only one. There's a lot of shame that comes in, but statistically we know 1 out of every 4 women experience an unplanned pregnancy. It is an epidemic in the United States. It happens primarily to college age women as well. And that's my hope for this podcast, is for these young women who do find themselves in an unplanned pregnancy to hear these stories of resilience and women who have walked through this and ended up on the other side with a life that they are very proud of. Did it look exactly how they thought it would look when they first started college? Probably not. But a lot of times it's even better on the other end, once you get over that hurdle and once you figure out what your new normal is, I can't imagine my life without my husband and my almost 13-year-old boy who is my unplanned pregnancy. I just can't fathom it.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be my story as well. I think my life turned out so much better because of the strength I got on that day and the ability to chart my own course.
And after graduation, you didn't stop there, correct? You continued to pursue more degrees. Talk to our listeners about that because, finishing a degree is one thing, but then continuing to pursue further degrees with a baby, that is a whole different level.
Yeah, I didn't want to let my engineering degree rust or mold because it was really hard to get. It was 5.5 years of grueling work and I wanted to prove my mom wrong, So after we had our child, I applied to like a distance education graduate school that was up in the DC area, where I could drive to this campus and watch a video of a class at Virginia Tech.
Wow.
So every quarter, I would take one class.
Okay.
And it took me 5 years to get a master's degree.
Okay.
But I got a master's degree.
Wow.
After 2 years of these online classes, we actually moved to a town, Charlottesville, Virginia. And I was able to transfer those credits and I got accepted to the University of Virginia to finish out my master's degree.
Wow.
And I had a wonderful advisor there who was just great. I would go around campus with a baby in a backpack.
Oh my gosh.
I would go into his office with a baby in a backpack. I found a girl I knew who lived near campus who agreed to watch the baby while I was in class, just for a couple hours on a Tuesday and a couple hours on a Thursday, because it's just one class a semester or a quarter, whenever it was. So the only babysitting I had was just while I was in class, and it was right there next to campus. Otherwise, I'm walking around with the baby on my shoulders.
Oh.
And by then we had a second child. And so I'd often have a baby in a pack on the front and a toddler on the back in the Graco, backpack.
Wow.
It was 13 years ago I decided to come back to Auburn and teach where I graduated. And
does it feel so surreal to be walking, the concourses and be in the same? I mean, there are parts of Auburn that are brand new and beautiful, but there are parts of Auburn that are the same.
Yeah, Haley Center is the same. And that's where I teach, and that's where my office is.
Wow. Does it feel like a full circle moment, having experienced everything and then come back? Not just the girl that had the unplanned pregnancy, but now the woman who has the master's degree and the PhD. Does that just not feel so incredible?
Well, talking to you about this, and I've never spoken publicly about this, it was only recently that I would even mention it to friends.
Wow.
Because I carried that sense of shame with me for decades. Mm-hmm. Decades. I wouldn't tell anybody. But so talking with you today about it, I'm now a full endowed professor. I'm retiring at the end of this semester. I've had a long career in education. I've won numerous awards for my teaching and my research. I devoted my research to looking at ways kids could learn engineering.
Wow.
Because I never really learned it in a way that helped me love and apply it unless I was at that company. So I devoted my career to that. And, my life turned out really well.
Yes, I'd have to say so myself. Absolutely.
I have 5 grandchildren.
Oh my goodness.
All my children are married to wonderful people. They all have children.
Wow.
family is so important to me. My husband and we'll have our 40th wedding anniversary this year, which sounds like a lot, but it really sometimes feels like yesterday that I was going to that health clinic on campus to get my blood test.
Wow. Wow. So how did you hear about Baby Steps? And do you feel like if that program was around back then that you would have benefited from it?
Oh, I certainly would have benefited from it. I heard about it from an email. I don't remember what the email was. It was just something that showed up one day, and I reached out to the email address and just said, if you ever want me to come talk to the group, I'd be happy to, because I've got this personal story. I didn't say what it was, but eventually y'all reached out and invited me to do this podcast. But it feels really full circle to come back and now talk about it and say, I had more strength than I thought I had. Mm-hmm. I had more abilities to persevere and get through hard times than I thought I had. Mm-hmm. I could say no to my mother, which is something I never really did.
Right.
I could say no to my mother and it wouldn't be the end of the world.
Sure.
She would still be my mother.
Yes.
She's been a very loving and supportive grandmother and great grandmother now, and she lives here in town, and she's in her 90s.
Wow.
We never talked about that day ever ever again. It's kind of water under the bridge, and in thinking about that day, she was operating from her own love of me and her own beliefs.
Absolutely. And it's a place of fear. And I tell young women this all the time. Now that I'm a mom myself, you want the best for your child. And sometimes what you think is best for them isn't always what's best. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But at 22, you're old enough to make your own decisions and decide what is best for your life. And that's a really hard conversation to have with a parent that you love and respect and want to continue to be obedient to. But I couldn't have imagined. I did the same with my mom. I had to have that conversation and to let her know that wasn't what I wanted to do. And water under the bridge, grandparent now as well. And sometimes you have to find that courage deep within you. If you could go back to younger Chris finding out she's pregnant, what would you tell her? What piece of information would you leave her with?
There's nothing wrong with life. There's nothing wrong with children. There's nothing you can't do with the child that you could do without a child. It just might take longer. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say. I can still do everything, even if I hadn't got married, even if I was a single mom. I would have found a way. Absolutely. Because plenty of people have.
Mm-hmm. They have. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your story so openly. I know that's not always an easy thing to do. And I just really hope that your insight and your experience having an unplanned pregnancy will really empower women who are listening to this podcast and encourage our listeners. So thank you again for joining us.
You're welcome.
And to all of our listeners, we hope to have you back for our next episode of Unplanned and Untold. Bye-bye. Unplanned and Untold drops new episodes every other Wednesday. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star review if you love this episode. I'm Caitlin Willing, and this is Unplanned and Untold.